Every minute, 20 people in the United States become victims of domestic violence. That's more than 10 million people every year, and those are just the ones we know about. Behind those numbers are stories, real people, wives, husbands, children, entire families, shattered in silence. Tonight we uncover one of those stories. A well-respected man, a devoted mother, two children who never imagined what their father was capable of. A beautiful home where secrets festered behind closed doors. On the outside, they looked like the perfect family. But one night, the truth came out, and what investigators found inside that quiet house would leave a community shaken and a family forever changed. Join me as we dive deep into the chilling true story of a family destroyed from within, and try to uncover the real monster behind it all. This is not just a crime story. This is a story about control, silence, and survival. It started like many American stories, in a small, tight-knit town where the neighbors knew each other by name and the streets felt safe after dark. At the heart of that peaceful neighborhood was the Crawford family, a family that, to the outside world, appeared happy, stable, and close-knit. The kind of family others admired, the kind people waved to on their morning walks. At the head of the household was Thomas Crawford, a man in his early 40s, sharply dressed, soft-spoken, and respected. He worked as a project manager at a local construction firm. Steady income, no scandals, and always home by dinner. Thomas was the kind of man who coached Little League on weekends and volunteered at church during the holidays. To most, he was the model father and husband. His wife, Elena Crawford, was 38, a high school English teacher with a quiet strength and an ever-present gentleness. She was the type who remembered birthdays, brought in baked goods for her students, and never raised her voice in anger. She adored her two children, Sarah, age 12, a shy girl who loved drawing and animals, and Michael, age 9, a bright, energetic boy who was fascinated by outer space and dinosaurs. Photos of the Crawfords lined the walls of their modest home. Smiling faces at the beach, birthday parties filled with balloons, holiday dinners with sparkling lights. They were by all accounts a family that had everything going for them. But behind those framed smiles was a silence no one could see. Neighbors would later recall that Elena's eyes, once filled with warmth, had dulled in recent months. That she smiled less, spoke less. Her cheerful greetings had grown short, guarded, as if she were weighing every word. And Thomas? He was always polite, but distant. A man who seemed to live with a constant tightness behind his eyes. There was something calculated in his calmness, something almost rehearsed. Inside the house, the balance was beginning to tip. Elena had stopped hosting dinner parties. The children were no longer seen playing in the yard. Curtains that were once open to let in the sun now remained drawn. But no one asked questions. Why would they? After all, every family has rough patches. And Thomas was a good man. But the truth was much darker than anyone suspected. Elena had begun keeping a journal. At first, the entries were light, updates about school, the children's milestones, but over time they shifted. The handwriting grew tighter, the tone more desperate. She wrote about feeling watched, about arguments that started over nothing and ended with icy silences that lasted for days. She wrote about walking into rooms and finding her phone moved, her messages deleted. Sarah, just 12, had also noticed things. Her father's temper, his sharp glances, the way he spoke to her mother behind closed doors when he thought no one was listening. Michael didn't understand the words, but he understood fear, and he knew how to stay quiet when the air in the house got heavy. It wasn't violence that came first. It was control. Quiet, persistent, unrelenting control. Thomas didn't need to yell. He didn't need bruises to dominate. He used silence like a weapon, a carefully measured punishment that taught Elena how to shrink. He used guilt to shape her, fear to mold her. And outside, the world saw nothing, because monsters don't always growl. Sometimes, they smile. The Crawfords were the picture of suburban bliss. But in truth, they were a family on the edge of something irreversible. And what was coming would shatter everything. Elena Crawford didn't see it all at once. It wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't a scream in the night. It began slowly, the way shadows fall when the sun begins to disappear. In the early years, Thomas was charming. He brought her flowers, held open doors. He told her she was too good for this world, that she was lucky to have him, and that he was lucky to have her. It felt like love, until it didn't. The first sign came on their 5th anniversary, a dinner at home. Elena had forgotten to chill the wine. Thomas liked. He said nothing at first, just stood there, staring at her. Later that night, he didn't speak a word. Not out of disappointment, but control. A lesson, silence as punishment.
And it didn't stop there.
Over time, his affection became conditional, a reward system. He praised her when she stayed quiet in public, criticized her when she disagreed, not with rage, but with carefully chosen words designed to wound. "You always make things worse," he'd whisper. "You can't even keep the kids quiet. What would people think if they really saw what you're like?" Gaslighting became routine. Elena would recall a conversation. He'd tell her it never happened. She'd remember him saying something cruel. He'd insist she was imagining things. The lines between truth and manipulation blurred until she questioned her own mind. She started writing herself notes, keeping track of her own thoughts like a prisoner counting days. But abuse like this doesn't happen in isolation. It spreads. It infects everything, especially the children. Sarah, once vibrant and full of questions, withdrew into silence. She stopped drawing. She flinched when voices rose. And she started watching her mother more closely, mirroring her tension, mimicking her fear. Michael, too young to understand the nuances, understood enough to keep his distance when his father came home. He stopped asking to play, stopped running into Thomas's arms. Somewhere along the way, he learned the difference between a real hug and a cold one. And Elena, she adapted. She stopped dressing up, stopped attending school events. She declined offers from coworkers to get drinks after work, always with an excuse. The fewer interactions, the safer it felt. Thomas controlled everything, not with fists, but with a spreadsheet-like precision. He monitored the credit cards, checked the mileage on her car, knew when the laundry hadn't been folded or when a light had been left on. When she tried to speak up, even gently, he would shift the blame. "I work all day while you sit at home and complain," he'd say. "You should be grateful. Other women would kill for this life." And that was the cage. A home where every step felt like a test, where every word might be the wrong one, where love was dangled just out of reach, and guilt became a daily companion. Friends grew distant, not by choice, but by design. Thomas disliked company. He claimed others were bad influences. Slowly, they stopped calling, stopped visiting. Elena's world shrank, until it was just her children, and him. The final chilling confirmation came one evening in March. Elena had found messages on his phone, messages from another woman. She didn't confront him, not at first. She needed time to process. But Thomas, he already knew she'd seen them. That night, he sat across from her at the dinner table, said nothing, just stared, a stare that made her skin crawl. Then, without warning, he stood and walked out the door. Drove away, no explanation, no goodbye. He returned 4 hours later, and when Elena asked where he'd gone, he smiled and said, "Out. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." That's when Elena began making plans. Quietly, carefully. She wasn't sure if she was ready to leave, but she was sure that something inside her had broken, and she didn't know if it could be fixed. She wasn't scared yet, not fully, but she would be. Because when men like Thomas Crawford begin to feel control slipping through their fingers, they don't let go. They grip tighter. And when they grip tighter, people get hurt. It is often said that the most dangerous predators are the ones who wear the most convincing masks. By day, Thomas Crawford remained the portrait of a hardworking family man. He arrived at work on time, dressed in crisp shirts, exchanged friendly banter with coworkers, and attended the occasional office birthday party. He never raised suspicion, never revealed the coldness beneath the surface. But behind closed doors and behind encrypted phone apps, second bank accounts, and secret email addresses, Thomas was living a second life. Elena's discovery of the messages wasn't the first time he'd been unfaithful. It wasn't even the fifth. In fact, Thomas's double life stretched back years, longer than Elena could have ever imagined. Through a burner phone hidden in a locked toolbox in the garage, Thomas communicated with multiple women. Some were flings, others he strung along with promises, stories about a wife he claimed didn't understand him, or a marriage that was basically over. Lies built to satisfy his cravings for control, dominance, and deceit. He had one woman he saw weekly under the pretense of overtime at the office. Another he'd meet in a motel an hour away. He told her his name was James. She never knew he had children. Even more disturbing were the online forums he frequented late at night. Not just dating sites, but communities where men exchanged tactics to manage their wives, to dominate them emotionally and psychologically. Some of the content crossed the line from disturbing into predatory. Elena never knew about the messages he sent anonymously. Angry, degrading messages posted to strangers online, comments full of venom, always toward women, always rooted in control. This was the real Thomas, a man who wore civility like a costume, who studied how to manipulate, how to belittle, how to groom others into submission. He was not a man who lost control. He was a man who planned every moment of it. The women he manipulated outside his marriage were disposable. The moment they became emotional, demanding, or threatened to reveal the truth, he would vanish, change numbers, block them, as if they never existed. But inside his home, he couldn't vanish. Not from Elena, not from the children. And that made his grip on them even tighter. They were witnesses. And for Thomas, that made them dangerous. The mask began to slip in subtle ways. Elena noticed, Sarah noticed. Even Michael sensed the unease in his father's presence. The way his face stiffened when someone challenged him. The cold calculations behind his eyes when he was asked too many questions. It was Sarah who told her mother, late one evening, that she had seen her father arguing with a strange woman in the grocery store parking lot. He said it wasn't him, Sarah whispered, but he looked scared when I said her name. Elena's heart sank, not because she was surprised, but because she finally understood something she hadn't wanted to believe. Thomas wasn't just cheating. He was lying compulsively, dangerously, and he was unraveling. She began saving evidence. Photos of text messages, screenshots of bank activity. She kept them on a hidden USB drive, taped under a drawer in the laundry room. She began writing letters to herself, part journal, part warning, in case anything happened. But Thomas was already growing suspicious. His routines became erratic. He began checking her phone, her bag, her car. He questioned the children about what she said, who she spoke to, how long she spent online. One night, while Elena was asleep, he went through her laptop. The next morning, he said nothing, but she noticed her files had been rearranged. The USB drive, she moved it again, just in case. This was the beginning of the end. The man who once feigned affection was now fully revealed. Cold, calculating, dangerous. The illusion of a marriage was gone. What remained was a prison, with no doors, no bars, just fear, and a growing sense that something terrible was coming. Because men like Thomas don't implode quietly, they destroy everything, to maintain control. It was a Saturday morning. The air was still, the kind that comes before a storm. Elena stood by the window, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The children were asleep upstairs, unaware that the day ahead would change everything. For weeks, she had been building her case, a quiet rebellion in the shadows, a downloaded folder of messages, a carefully crafted timeline of events, an envelope with copies of bank statements and screenshots. She had even confided in a coworker, the school's guidance counselor, leaving her a sealed file labeled, "In case I'm gone." Elena had made an appointment with a lawyer, just a consultation, nothing binding, nothing obvious. But Thomas found the note, a reminder scribbled in her planner, half buried beneath a stack of papers. He didn't confront her right away. Instead, he waited, observed. That night, he was unusually calm. He kissed the children goodnight, sat beside Elena on the couch, made small talk about a television show neither of them were watching. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The next morning, the confrontation came. He slammed the envelope down on the kitchen table. Every piece of evidence she had gathered, torn from its hiding spot, exposed. "You think I'm stupid?" he growled. "You think you're gonna run and ruin my life?" Elena stood frozen, her hands trembling, but she said nothing. Her silence only made him angrier. He accused her of poisoning the children against him, of sneaking around like a criminal, of trying to humiliate him. But then his voice changed. He dropped the rage, replaced it with something more terrifying, calm, cruel control. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "I've built this life. You're part of it. You don't leave unless I say so." That night, Elena didn't sleep. She packed a bag, one for her, one for the kids, and hid them in the trunk of her car. She left a voicemail for the lawyer, another for her sister. "If something happens to me, tell them to check the toolbox in the garage." But Thomas was always one step ahead. The next morning, her car keys were gone, her phone missing. He called the school and said she was sick. He kept the children home, under the guise of a family day. The walls were closing in. That afternoon, Sarah overheard her parents fighting, not yelling, whispering, sharp and tense. She crept to the top of the stairs, clutching her little brother's hand. What she heard made her stomach twist. "If you try to leave me," Thomas said, "you won't make it out of this house." That night, Elena made her decision. She would escape no matter what it took. No more waiting, no more planning, just action. She sent one final message using the school laptop she had brought home. "Please help me. I can't keep living like this. I'm afraid of what he'll do. I'm afraid he'll hurt the children." The message never made it to the recipient. Thomas had installed tracking software. He intercepted it, read every word, and that was the spark. The following morning, police received a 911 call from a neighbor, a woman who had heard a scream, not loud but sharp, sudden, then silence. When officers arrived at the Crawford residence, the house was locked. No one answered the door, no signs of struggle, not at first. Then came the smell of gas, a faint hiss from inside. They forced entry. Inside, the house was still, too still. A bowl of cereal left on the counter, a cup knocked over on the floor. The children's backpacks by the door. Upstairs, they found Sarah and Michael, alive, confused, scared, locked in a room. Elena was nowhere to be seen, and Thomas was in the garage, sitting beside a running car, unconscious, a hose running from the exhaust through the window. A suicide attempt. He was rushed to the hospital, revived, and arrested. But Elena was missing. It wasn't until 2 days later that a search team found her buried in a shallow grave in the woods 5 miles from the home, wrapped in a sheet, her wedding ring still on her finger. The monster had finally been unmasked, but only after taking everything from the people who loved him. Tragedy doesn't end when the violence stops. For the survivors, it begins there. After Thomas Crawford was found alive in the garage, and Elena's body was recovered in the woods, a new storm settled over the family. One of grief, of shock, of unanswered questions. Sarah, just 13 years old, would later tell investigators that her father had been acting strangely the night before, that he'd kissed her forehead and told her he loved her, something he hadn't done in months. She thought it was odd. She didn't know it was a goodbye. Michael, only 8, didn't understand what was happening. For days, he asked when his mother was coming home. His sister didn't know what to say. They were placed in the temporary custody of their maternal aunt, Elena's sister, Rachel, who stepped in as their emergency guardian. Rachel described the children as shell-shocked, saying they wouldn't sleep unless the lights were on and the doors locked. Meanwhile, the town was gripped by disbelief. News of the murder spread fast. The local media dubbed it the masked monster case, referencing the horrifying contrast between the public image of Thomas Crawford and the monster he had become behind closed doors. Detectives pieced together the timeline. Forensic teams found blood residue in the back of Thomas's truck. Traces of soil matched the burial site. Surveillance cameras caught him on the highway near the woods at 3:12 a.m., just hours before the neighbor made the 911 call. His devices told the rest of the story. Deleted search history recovered from his laptop included disturbing phrases like, "How to make someone disappear," "undetectable poisons," and "How long does it take for a body to decompose?" When Thomas awoke in his hospital bed, he asked just one question: "Are they okay?" No mention of Elena, no remorse, just a cold, detached curiosity. He was charged with first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. His trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was filled with tension. Family members sat behind the prosecution, their faces weary and hollow. Sarah testified. So did Rachel. Their words pierced the silence. They spoke of fear, of manipulation, of the way Thomas would watch them. Not with love, but with possession. The defense tried to argue temporary insanity, that Thomas had snapped under pressure, that he was a broken man pushed beyond his limits. But the evidence told a different story, one of calculation, of planning, of intent. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. Guilty. Life in prison. No chance of parole. When the verdict was read, Thomas showed no reaction, just the same empty gaze he had worn since the moment he was arrested. But justice, though served, could not erase what had been lost. Elena was buried on a gray morning, under a pale sky that seemed to weep with the mourners. Her children stood by her grave, holding hands, clinging to each other, the last pieces of a family destroyed by one man's darkness. In the years that followed, Sarah and Michael slowly rebuilt their lives, with therapy, with love, with time. Sarah wrote about her experience in a school essay titled "The Man Who Lived in Two Shadows." It won a statewide award. She read it with trembling hands and tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael, now in middle school, has no memory of the last thing his mother said to him. But he tells people this: "She protected me. I know she did. Even when she was scared." Rachel became their full-time guardian. She left her job, moved across state lines, and made the children her world. She said she owed that to her sister. And yet the question still lingers: how many more monsters walk among us wearing smiles, attending parties, dropping their kids off at school, all while hiding their darkest truths behind closed doors? The Crawford tragedy reminds us that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. Elena's story may have ended in silence, but her voice still echoes through every courtroom testimony, every journal entry left behind, every tear her children shed in the night. Hers is not just a story of horror. It is a story of strength. A woman who tried, who fought, who risked everything to protect her children from a man they once called father. But what makes this tragedy truly haunting is how long it went unnoticed. Thomas Crawford was not a stranger in the shadows. He was not a masked intruder. He was the man everyone trusted. The man who grilled hot dogs at the school fundraiser. The man who mowed the neighbors' lawns when they were away. He smiled. He waved. And then he went home and terrorized the people who loved him. And that is the darkest truth of all. Monsters don't always live under the bed. Sometimes they live in your house. Sometimes they kiss you goodnight. Domestic abuse doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it's isolation. Sometimes it's manipulation. Sometimes it's silence, weaponized and sharpened like a blade. In the United States alone, an average of 3 women are murdered every day by a current or former intimate partner. And for every murder, there are thousands more suffering behind closed doors. Afraid, unheard, invisible. Many people asked afterward, why didn't Elena leave sooner? Why didn't she fight harder? But the real question is, why did no one help her fight? Why did no one see what was happening right in front of them? She tried to tell us, with her silence, with her unease, with her over-preparedness, with the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. Sarah and Michael survived, but survival is not the same as healing. It takes years, it takes support, and it takes a world that finally decides to listen. The lessons of this story are painful, but they are necessary. If you notice someone withdrawing, changing, isolating, don't look away. Ask questions, offer a safe space. Believe them the first time they show fear, even if they don't use the word abuse. Elena's voice was taken from her, but maybe yours can help someone else. And if you're watching this and you recognize yourself in her story, please don't wait. Reach out. There are people who will believe you, who will help you, who will stand between you and the monster at your door. The darkness only wins when the silence stays unbroken. To Elena, your story is not forgotten. You mattered. You still do. To Sarah and Michael, may your lives be filled with the peace that was stolen from you. May your mother's love always be your shield. And to those watching, if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what stood out to you. If you've lived through something similar, your voice could be someone else's lifeline. Subscribe for more true stories that matter. Stories that dig deeper, that give voice to the unheard, that shine a light in the darkest corners of human experience. And if you're ready for another story that will break your heart and maybe help it heal, click the next video on your screen now. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop listening.